Hey guys, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern, and today we are going to be learning about the Byzantine Empire. This is the start of 3 lectures on what's been going on in Europe. So this is 6.1.6a, I apologize. You do need to be completing a daily cover page in conjunction with this lecture. And answer any of the questions as they pop up on Edpuzzle. So let's get started. For your bell work today, what happened in Rome? What happened to Rome? Right? We talked about it for a couple lectures a while back, and we haven't really talked about it since. So what happened to the Roman Empire? All right, so this is going to fall under topic 1.6. Today, we are talking specifically about the Byzantine Empire. But for the AP, this talks about topics 1.6, developments in Europe from 1200 to 1450. You have 3 learning objectives associated with this topic, but today we are going to be focusing on how beliefs and practices of the predominant religions in Europe affected European society. We're talking about the Byzantines. So this is actually a illustration of Constantinople in the height of the Byzantine Empire, what it would have looked like. So the Byzantine Empire is not what they would have called themselves, right? They would have called themselves Rome. They would identify themselves as Romans. And yet, historians refer to this as the Byzantine Empire as a way to significantly differentiate it from sort of the Rome of Julius Caesar and the Senate. It is such a different beast that although they would trace their own heritage back to Rome, they are going to operate in a way that's very different from Rome. So the Byzantine Empire is the historian's name for the eastern portion of the Roman Empire from the 4th century onward. So that's about 300s onward. Their capital is going to be in Constantinople, and they will fall in 1453. So, quick reminder, you had the western part of the empire whose capital was in Rome, and the eastern part of the empire whose capital was in Constantinople. That was after Constantine had renamed after himself. But of course, the western half of the empire will fall to invaders, and the eastern half will continue on. So let's talk a little bit about Byzantium, about Constantinople and our new empire. Well, we see that the Byzantine Empire will continue this rule of an emperor. You have a single ruler with supreme legal and religious authority. So this is one thing that's going to make Eastern Europe different from Western Europe in terms of Christianity. In Western Europe, you're going to have the emergence of the Pope. So you're going to have a separate religious leader and political leader. In Byzantium, your religious leader and your political leader are the same person. So this single leader, the emperor, will keep the empire together, but over time they will lose territory from Muslim armies. Over time, loss of land, revenue, and religious support will reduce their power. So it begins with Emperor Constantine in 324. But in 476, the western part of Rome collapses, and our next significant emperor is going to be Justinian. So, a couple notes before we get to Justinian. Constantinople is the city to know, is our capital. It's cosmopolitan. It's opulent. It's wealthy. I don't know if you saw, this was another sort of recreation of what it would have looked like, right? It's gorgeous. It's groomed. You have these huge public parks, and like think about how opulent Rome was. Same kind of idea. One of the reasons why it is going to be so opulent is because of its location. So Constantinople is on this isthmus connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So that means it's going to have access to Mediterranean sea trade and Central Asian commerce. It's often called sort of like the doorway to the west or the doorway to the east, right? This is what connects Asia to Western Europe. We see that Christianity is going to remain dominant, hugely dominant, so overwhelmingly dominant in Byzantium. We refer to it now as Greek Orthodox or Eastern Orthodox Christianity. It will maintain strength despite the rapid growth of Islam. So the spread of culture and politics to parts of the world, we'll see that culture and politics will spread to parts of the world that had previously been kind of disenfranchised, like the Balkans and Western Europe, Western Russia. So this is going to spread Christianity into these regions. And over time, we'll see a breakdown in relationship between Western Europe's Christian leadership and Eastern Europe's. So, like I said, Justinian. Justinian is probably our most significant Byzantine ruler. We see that under his leadership, you have these huge military gains, this huge expansion in his attempt to rebuild the original Roman Empire. So he makes gains in North Africa and in Italy. He really systematizes the Roman legal code. So this is going to create a foundation that will really influence future law codes in Europe. This helps reduce legal confusion. It really unites and organizes the new empire. He will invest in projects to renovate Constantinople. He will make Greek the official language, which is a huge change from Latin, right? Latin was one of the things that makes Romans Rome. And he's saying, no, it's Greek, right? So he's really embracing this sort of more Hellenistic culture. And you have what's known as the Plague of Justinian. Poor guy gets named after him. But it's probably an early wave of the bubonic plague that hits Constantinople. Couple things, random things. One, these beautiful mosaics, like the one here of Justinian, is really indicative and common of Byzantine art. So if you're taking AP art history, you'll look at some of these mosaics. They are tend to be very sort of flat, two-dimensional. Ms. Sheets will go into all kinds of depth about why they do these certain things, but I just think they're gorgeous. So let's look at a map. So just the red part was what the empire was when Justinian came to power. The orange part were all the parts that he reconquered during his rule. This is a really interesting video. I would encourage you to watch it. It's not a required one, though. It's going to talk about the walls of Constantinople. These walls are going to be enormous. There's multifaceted, and they are going to repel literally centuries of invaders. There is a fantastic book about the fall of Constantinople. It's called 1453. 1453 is one of those dates that you really need to know. It's sort of a turning point in history in many ways. It's going to be the start of the Ottoman Empire with the fall of the Byzantines. But man, I knew how that was going to end. The Byzantines lose. But I was on the edge of my seat. I was so stressed out about what was going to happen next. It was if you want a good historical read, 1453. I totally recommend it. But this video is optional. All right. During Justinian's lifetime, you don't really have Muslim invaders yet, right? Their main enemy are going to be the Sassanids, who are, think like Persians. They're primarily Zoroastrians. However, once you have the rise of these large Muslim empires, you're going to see all of this territory here is, of course, going to be lost, right? They are going to be pushed back across most of the Anatolian Peninsula. So over time, the Byzantine rulers will be primarily concerned with the defense against Muslim invaders. So you have this Muslim siege of Constantinople in 711 CE, where the Byzantines will be able to hold off the Muslim invaders, but it's going to cost them most of their territory in the Mediterranean. So one of the problems is the Muslim navy is going to be pretty inexperienced, as opposed to the Byzantine navy, which has been sailing around all these Greek islands for a long time. The other thing the Byzantines are going to have that the Muslim navies don't have are going to be something called Greek fire, which is essentially napalm, which is really effective against wooden boats. You just like hurl a barrel of napalm, set it on fire, it splatters all over the wooden boat, it's burning, it's going down. So despite this one victory, the Byzantine Empire's strength and size will be reduced because of the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates. You see huge economic burdens as they lose this revenue, the tax revenue, the ability to do trade, and the loss of territory. It will lead to an increase in taxes as the tax burden transfers to those people who are left. And we start to see this pattern of weak emperors and our aristocratic estates start to grow larger. All right, but let's talk a little bit about society and urban life in Byzantium. Another fabulous mosaic. When was it? It was like, I'm going to so date myself. But in like 2013, Dolce & Gabbana had this fabulous haute couture line that's basically like Byzantine inspired clothing and jewelry. I just loved it. I'm not even like really a fashion person, but it was so fabulously beautiful. Anyways, that image reminds me of it. So let's talk a little bit about Christianity in the Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire has a really important cultural legacy, both on the Orthodox Church and on the revival of Greek and Roman studies, which will really influence the Renaissance. So as Rome splits, we see two versions of Christianity kind of emerge. Two separate Christian civilizations develop out of this fall of Rome. In the East, right, centered on Constantinople, you have sort of this Eastern Orthodox tradition, Greek Orthodox tradition. In the West, we'll have a tradition that becomes known as Roman Catholic. We'll talk more about what's been going on politically in Western Europe in a little bit, but essentially you have lots of small feudal kingdoms fighting with each other. So you have a few major events in terms of religion in the Byzantine Empire. One is known as the iconoclasm. Essentially, it's going to be the destruction of icons. So icons were a big part of Byzantine Christian faith. So images of saints, of Jesus, of Mary, whatever, and you would parade these around. You might light candles, you might pray in front of them. Well, one of the reasons why we see in the 8th century this vast destruction of a lot of the religious imagery of Christians is an attempt to incorporate the Jewish and Muslim communities living in the Byzantine Empire. Right? Both Jewish and Muslim communities are severely averse to icons, right? The idea that you are praying in front of a statue or a picture, it's a little bit too close to false worship, right? Like, how do you know you're actually praying to God and you're not just getting deceived and praying to the statue? So in a way, to be like, no, like we have more in common with you than you think. Like they tried to get rid of all of the icons. It didn't really work. Empress Theodora is going to bring it back. We see this great schism between the Eastern and the Western Church in 1054. I'll talk about that in a moment. It's a primarily comes out of a theological debate, but it's also sort of the final straw on two large communities that had been growing more and more distinct over time. So we see the economy of, I'll talk more about religion in just a minute. The economy of the Byzantine Empire is going to be really flourishing, right? They have connections to trans-Saharan trade in Africa, Mediterranean trade, the Silk Road, so our trade that goes across the land routes in Asia. You have Constantinople as a really prosperous trading city. So the main thing that they're going to produce is going to be silk. And in fact, they're going to be able to rival the Chinese market. They will also produce cloth, carpets, and pottery. So over time, though, we'll see government intervention and monopoly of the economy will decrease innovation. And as all luxury goods tracked towards Constantinople, other major cities will begin to shrink. You have a large peasant class that supplies agricultural goods. We use metal coins, and these coins would be stamped with the face of the current emperor, which is really helpful for archaeologists and scholars to track the circulation of money at different times. As plagues caused cities to shrink, we see the urban elite shrink as well. The city of Constantinople itself is multi-ethnic and multi-religious. You have large Jewish and Muslim populations living within Byzantium and specifically Constantinople. And we see that within the city itself, taxes on foreigners and locals would be the same. So this is a way to really make foreigners welcome in your city. Politically, our rulers are going to see themselves as Roman emperors ordained by God to rule. Government was just seen as a continuation of the Roman Empire. So the emperors are both the head of the government and the church. You have this incredibly complex bureaucracy open to all social classes, but really aristocrats dominate it. So the bureaucracy will help organize the empire politically, socially, and economically. You will have provincial governors appointed by the emperor. So this is a way of organizing a vast territory. You have like local governors, like Governor Ducey. Over time, though, we are going to see that this bureaucracy gets to be top heavy. The emperors and the royal family get to be too involved in spying and intrigue. It's very Game of Thrones, like poisoning each other and incest. It gets pretty crazy. Let's talk about society in general, though. You have this huge emphasis on family and tradition, like so much emphasis on tradition. Like they talk about how in the book 1453, right? They're trying to figure out like that emperor is trying to, whose name is actually Constantine, is actually going to try to like be innovating and to like preserve his city. And people are like, no, because we've always done it this way. We must do it. Like we refuse to perhaps protect ourselves more effectively because it would be change, and we're very much anti-change. The role of women in Byzantium is pretty interesting. Before, in Roman times, right, you have this all-powerful father figure, right? The pater familia, very patriarchal. But now women have a little bit more freedom in public. So after the 7th century, we'll see there's a bit of a reversal of that. Women will be stuck at home more. They'll be veiled. The only males that they would socialize with would be their husbands, fathers, sons, right? Male family members. But we do see that some women had a significant role in public life and engaged in commercial activities. Women in the Byzantine Empire could inherit wealth and could possess independent wealth. And of course, in Christian belief, just like in Muslim and Jewish belief, women were equal before God spiritually, right? So there's no, like your eternal soul is equal to that of a man. And so the most important part about you is equal. There's a couple really interesting Byzantine empresses to know. So there's some really fascinating Byzantine empresses. I think the most interesting of the bunch is going to be Empress Theodora. You see her picture there. So Theodora is a fascinating lady. One, she was a prostitute. She was an actress. But for most of human history, if you're an actress, it means like you perform on stage and then you perform in the bedroom for a fee. So she was a prostitute. She gets married to this guy. He maltreats her. So she goes back to Constantinople and continues to be an actress / prostitute. Justinian sees her and is like, wow, what a lady. I love her. And wants to marry her. But there's a law that says emperors can't marry prostitutes. So he just changes the law. And she's made empress. I mean, come on. Talk about rags to riches. So she's going to institute a lot of reforms to benefit women. Specifically, she's going to get rid of a lot of policies that prohibit prostitution. She's going to create convents. So one of the big things about convents, right? These are monastic communities for women to go to. So you become a nun. Well, you might think like, so what? A convent is a safe space for a woman to live out her life without being controlled by a man, right? It's one of the few options during this time period that women have for choosing how to spend their time without being forced to marry some dude and have his kids, whether they like him or not. So she's opening convents. She is implementing harsher punishments for rape and for violence against women. Another significant one is going to be Irene. Under these two empresses, we see women start to get the rights to divorce, the rights to child guardianship. So that means if you get a divorce, like there's actually a chance for the wife to keep the kids. Property rights. It's pretty fascinating. All right, let me talk a little bit more about the Great Schism. Because our objective for today does ask about religion. So in 1054, you have what's essentially mutual excommunication. That means both the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church said, you're not allowed to be in my club anymore. And the other one was like, well, you're not allowed to be in my club anymore. And I was like, cool, guys, you don't want to be in each other's clubs. It's useful, though, to know about how these two religious traditions are different. So one is the division of power. In the Roman Catholic Church, you have the Pope, right, the religious leader, and then you have kings. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, you have the emperor first, who is also your ultimate religious leader, and then you have patriarchs, right? But a patriarch is more on the line of like a cardinal, right? So Roman Catholic hierarchy, Pope, cardinals, archbishops, bishops, blah, 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 right? For Eastern Orthodox, it would be more like emperor / pope, patriarch, blah, blah, blah. Other differences, clerical celibacy. And some of these differences will emerge over time, right? When in 1054, priests and monks in Western Europe are still allowed to get married. But over time, this will change. So Roman Catholic priests and monks, clergy, will not be allowed to get married, are not supposed to have any sex. Greek Orthodox can get married. Eucharist, flat bread, unleavened bread, leavened bread. Latin for the Roman Catholic tradition, which is fine, except, no one speaks Latin in Europe anymore because they're not Romans, right? They speak German or French or whatever. So no one, even if you could read, you probably can't read the Bible, but no one can really read. Whereas in the Greek Orthodox tradition, it's in Greek, everyone speaks Greek, and most everyone can read Greek. Well, a greater percentage of people can read Greek. Let me say that. All right, influences. Roman legal system. So you can sort of see the influence of the Roman laws, the 12 tables, in the Roman Catholic hierarchy and their rules of order. whereas in the Greek Orthodox system, you see much more of an influence of philosophy. Overall, the original debate was, how does the Holy Spirit relate to Jesus and God? It's a very complex theological debate. And even the Bible's like, you can't understand this. But the leadership apparently tried to, and they disagreed. So after the Eastern West Schism, the Great Schism, you sort of see which regions are left Orthodox, which ones are left Catholic, and which ones are kind of mixed. All right, here's another map. So here's Constantinople. So you can see how they're on the Bosphorus Strait, right? How their location really gives them access to the Black Sea and thus all of this Asian trade and the Mediterranean Sea trade. So, what role did women play in Byzantine society? And I'd like you to compare the role of women in Byzantium to that of women in our Muslim empires. How were they similar or different? All right, let's talk just a little bit about the achievements of the Byzantines. First, fabulous mosaics. I've seen a bunch of them. They're great. Huge fan. But the big one, of course, is going to be the Hagia Sophia. So the Hagia Sophia is this huge cathedral originally. So it's an engineering and architectural marvel. The fact that they were able to build this huge dome is unbelievable. Hagia Sophia translates to sacred wisdom. In it, it was designed with the idea that light was a symbol of God. So you want lots of windows, access for light to come in. Over time, once Byzantium falls to the Ottomans will transform the Hagia Sophia into a mosque and build some minarets around it so you can have the call to prayer. The mosaics within it were decadent, reflective, but many of those mosaics will be covered up by the Muslims because they are against imagery in worship. It was for a long time after the Ottomans fell, it was a sort of like a museum owned by the state, not used for religious worship for Christians or Muslims. The Turkish government has recently changed its status, turning it back into a mosque. All right, you also are going to have the emergence of the Cyrillic alphabet. So Cyril is going to go up north into, like the Czech Republic. So this is Cyril and Methodius. They're a couple priests. And they're going to go convert the Slavic peoples to Christianity. And they're like, let's tell you about Jesus. And they're like, great. And so they learned the local language, tell the Slavs about Jesus. And these Slavic peoples are like, we want to learn more. And they're like, well, read the Bible. And they're like, we don't know how to read. They're like, well, we'll just translate the Bible into your local language. Like, not a big deal. And they're like, we don't have an alphabet. So they create an alphabet based on the Greek alphabet. And this Cyrillic alphabet is going to be used in like Russian, Ukrainian, many Eastern European languages. We see that there's a state-organized education system in Byzantium. Reading, writing, grammar, both boys and girls will be educated, so literacy is going to be quite high. All right, the Hagia Sophia, it's gorgeous. I've been there. Really recommend it. It's just unbelievable. All right, I do want you to watch this one. This one is required. Rise and Fall of the Byzantine Empire. Please. Let me talk a little bit about the fall as well before we do our last discussion question. So the fall begins after 1054, after the Great Schism. Things are basically downhill because Eastern Europe and Western Europe are officially enemies. After the Battle of 1071, with the Battle of Manzikert, where the Seljuk Turks will take most of the Central Asian territory and remove important sources of food, taxes, and trade from Byzantium. You see that the independent Slavic states of Bulgaria and Serbia will break away from Byzantium control. Thus, you see just how Byzantium is starting to shrink and shrink and shrink. In 1204, with the Fourth Crusade, the Western European Crusaders show up and are like, we're here to help. And they just rob and destroy all of Constantinople. And they're like, we're your brothers in Christ. Like, why are you stealing all of our stuff? Like, why are you putting like all of our holy things, like just like in the back of a wagon? And like, it's pretty terrible. So that's not great. So, in fact, if you go to Venice and you go to San Marco Square, you will see these beautiful, huge horses over the top of the cathedral. Yeah, those were stolen in the Fourth Crusade from Constantinople. Let's see. And eventually, 1453, Constantinople, having limped along, will fall to the Ottoman Turks and the last of the empire will collapse. So, what was a Great Schism? What contributes to the fall of the Byzantine Empire? Answer this after you watch the TED Ed video, please. All right, let's do a couple practice questions and be done. Source. So, you might want to pause the video, read your source. Saint Sophia in this case is Hagia Sophia, right? The cathedral. Okay. Number 1. Which of the following is true regarding the construction of public buildings and monuments, such as those described in the passage? Okay, are you ready? Based on the passage and your knowledge of world history, which of the following could be best inferred about Constantinople and the other urban areas during this period? Last one, I think. Which of the following was an important factor that led to the decline of cities like Constantinople during the classical and post-classical period? All right, for your summary, I would like you to explain how beliefs and practices of the predominant religions in Europe affected European society. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Have a great day.